My title is Pray Upon the Lord. So, obviously it's going to be about prayer. And instead of me telling you or advising you or counseling you on prayer, I'm going to give you an example from the Bible. So, I can speak for myself that my mother and father taught me how to pray. I was born and raised in the Church of God, and they also taught I had two older brothers, Mark Anthony and Derek Sean, and we were basically taught to petition God for anything. Anything. I want more ice cream tomorrow night, or I want my favorite team to win next weekend. Just little things, but I'm a kid. I mean, what do you understand as a child? You're young, so you only understand, you think like a child, you are a child, you speak like a child. So as I got older, I started getting a little bit more intricate in things that I would ask for. However, what I want to ask you today to think about is in our communication with God, as we mature, as we grow in our faith, what do we understand about prayer itself? Because it is communication with God. We can do it all the time. Pray without ceasing. That's what the Bible commands us to. So, I get to talk about Chuck because he's not here. So, Chuck and we went up to Vero Beach about 2 weeks ago. And it's about a 2-hour drive from his house up to Vero Beach. And we were looking for a place for this Sabbath as well as next month. Vero Beach needs to find at least 1 week to meet. And so driving up there, Chuck's driving. Chuck talks. I respond. Chuck, me. Chuck, me. 2 hours, one way. That's how men communicate. We all know this. Us men anyways, and obviously you women definitely know we communicate this way. So imagine, what's the difference? What are we doing? We are sharing information, but we're more like conveying information. It's more of Chuck's asked me a question, I look at my phone, and I respond. That's it. It was very simple. Now, archetypically, men, when they're talking to other men, like here, like Mr. Maurice coming up and helping me with the microphone that we couldn't get to work, we're trying to fix something. It's information that we're looking at a problem, we're focused on the problem, and we're trying to fix it to affect a change. That's how men communicate with one another. Women are different, very different. So when women communicate with one another, you make connections. You share ideas. You share thoughts when you're talking to a woman. Not like this. It's like this. You're sharing passions, concepts. You are sharing yourselves with one another. So, the $64,000 question is, does God want us to communicate to him like men or like women? And I'm not going to answer that for you, but we are going to see a really good example. So as I said, the title of this is Pray Upon the Lord. And we're going to talk about Hannah. Before we do, though, I want you to think about Hannah. Beautiful woman, great example. But first I'm going to go to a scripture that I do not have a slide for. It's on Numbers 27, verses 6 through 11. So those of you who have Bibles, if you wouldn't mind turning with me to Numbers 27, verses 6 through 11. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, the daughters of Zelophehad speak rightly. They shall be surely given a possession of an inheritance among their father's brethren, and thou shalt cause the inheritance of their father to pass unto them. I.e., women matter. Okay? And thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel, saying, if a man die, and have no son, and you, all of you, shall cause his inheritance to pass unto his daughter. And if he have no daughter, then the inheritance will go to his brethren. And if he has no brethren, then they will be given back to his father's brethren. Verse 11, and in his father has no brethren, his kinsman, Goel, redeemer. If you were here last week or you heard the message, we spoke about Boaz. And Boaz and Ruth, that theme will come out through this story that we are about to touch upon. The Redeemer. So reading verse 11, and if his father have no brethren, then you shall give unto his inheritance to the Redeemer, to the kinsman that next to him, in his family, that they shall possess it, and it shall be to the children of Israel a statute and a judgment, as the Lord commanded Moses. Okay, so I want all of us to think about, in this message, patriarchal inheritance. It went through the males, but in this case, God is making an exception because women matter. Now in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 1, now there was one man, a certain man from Ramath Zophim of Mount Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephrathite. What you're going to see and what I'm going to definitely show you in this first chapter of this book is there is going to be a lot of repetition. A lot. So those of you that like to take notes, you're going to have a lot of notes today. So Ramath, Zophim. Zophim and Zuph are right here. That is exactly the same. Ephraim, Ephrathites, this is exactly the same. One man, that'll be important later on because it'll say he has one wife. And then the second wife, so there's a number one, and then there's a number two that's coming. Obviously it's going to be Hannah is number one, Peninnah is number two, but we'll get to that in a moment. But there's a lot of repetition. Now, Mount of Ephraim. This is where I really want us to focus on. So if we can see the map, it's going to be a bit of a geography class. Down here is Jebus. This is going to become what is called Jerusalem later on. Jebus here, this area right here, just north of that, that's Benjamin. Benjamin is the area that clearly is going to be ruled by King Saul. North of Benjamin, right here, is Shiloh. Shiloh is not in Benjamin. Shiloh will be where the Ark of the Covenant will be, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Please turn to Joshua chapter 17, verse 3. I have a slide for that one. Joshua 17, verse 3. Or maybe not. 17, verse 5, I have one. So 17, verse 3, it says, but Zelophehad. So this is where Zelophehad is mentioned. Obviously, he's died in the wilderness. The son of Hefer, the son of Gilead, Machir, he's from Manasseh. Okay? So from Manasseh. Verse 5 of chapter 17. And there fell 10 portions to Manasseh in Gilead and Bashan. Now the reason why we talk a lot about the geography is so for you to understand that God is doing all this work with Israel in a very confined space. So Mount Ephraim is mentioned in chapter 17, verse 15. And Joshua answered, this is Joshua, son of Nun, get thee up from the wood country, cut down for thyself there the land of Perizzites, if Mount Ephraim be too narrow for you. Mount Ephraim, what we're going to go back to and talk about, is where all of this family is going to take place with Samuel. But we're not getting to Samuel yet. I'm giving you the backstory. Joshua chapter 20, verses 1 through 6. Joshua 20, verses 1 through 6, you have the cities of refuge. Mount Ephraim is mentioned in the cities of refuge. Who thinks the cities of refuge are very important in the Bible? Yeah, very important. Jerusalem is also mentioned as a city of refuge. If someone died, and they died under mysterious circumstances, you could flee to the city of refuge. Therefore, a priest would speak to God with an ephod, and he would judge your case. If you were telling the truth, then therefore you couldn't leave the city until the avenger of blood, the requirement was passed. The high priest died, or it had the 50th year, the Jubilee year. But you were safe as long as you were telling the truth. If you were lying, they would push you out of the city, and the avenger of blood would take the justice of what happened. So this is the beginning of it, Joshua chapter 20, verses 1 through 6. Now in verse 7, Mount Ephraim is mentioned as one of the cities of refuge, okay? Think about where we're going with this. Samuel, Hannah, Elkanah, city of refuge. Joshua chapter 21, verse 5. For me, it's on the other side of the page. And the rest of the children of Kohath. Kohath are the singers. You will find a lot of Kohathites in the book of Psalms, writing and singing. These are Levites. This is where Samuel's family is going to come from, okay? It's also important that you remember later on in 1 Chronicles chapter 6, if you want to know also where Samuel's family comes from, these are also Levites, okay? This is just proof in the scriptures. Joshua 21:21, it talks about Shechem. Shechem will be important later on because of obviously we already had the story of Joseph. Joseph's brothers murdered all the men of Shechem, but in the suburbs of Mount Ephraim. So this is giving you an idea of where it's close by, okay? Now in Joshua chapter 24:29 through 33, who knows what tribe Joshua the son of Nun was from? You don't have to shout it up. You raise your hands. He was from Ephraim. Joshua was an Ephraimite. Shiloh, the Ark of the Covenant, when it came out of the wilderness into the Holy Land, was in Joshua's native area. We don't know why. I don't know why. I couldn't find it in the scriptures, but the first mentioning of the tabernacle being built in Shiloh is Joshua 18. Doesn't tell why, but in Joshua chapter 24, verses 29 through 33, it talks about when he died, he was 110 years old, where he was buried, which is in Mount Ephraim. That's in verse 30. 31, Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua, all the elders, they overlived Joshua as well. 32, and the bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel brought up out of Egypt, were buried in Shechem. Where was Joseph's dad buried? Was it Shechem? No, his dad was buried in Hebron. Joseph's mother, if we could see the map one more time, please. You think about where Joseph's mother died. Right over here. Kirjath Arbim, nowhere near Hebron. Jacob is buried with Leah, not with Rachel. Keep this in mind. In Joshua 24, verse 33, Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the high priest, he died and was buried there on the hill that was given to Phinehas in Mount Ephraim. Okay? So I'm giving you the backstory of the Israelites and Joshua. Now in Judges chapter 17, there is a man named Micah. Micah steals money from it's 2 chapters. We're not going to get into it, but I'm going to tell you. Steals money from his mother, gives it back to her because she curses him, builds an idol with that money, starts his own little cult, and he has a Levite. A Levite who comes from, anyone know? That's right, Mount Ephraim. Well, what's going on with Mount Ephraim? You have a lot of religious consternation there. Same book, Judges, chapter 19. You have another Levite, okay? But he happens to be sojourning. He's just visiting because remember, Levites were given no land. They all had to be parcels within all the other tribes. So this Levite is sojourning in Mount Ephraim and his concubine comes from Bethlehem, Judah. Now remember, you have Ephraim, you have Benjamin, and you have Judah. So he has to go all the way down to get his concubine down in Bethlehem, Judah. And on the way back in Jebus, which would become Jerusalem, is where you have these men of Benjamin. Because if you recall, I just told you, Jerusalem, or the future Jerusalem, is in the land of Benjamin. These men are really terrible human beings. They want to know this Levite carnally. He instead pushes out his concubine, and she is tormented, to put it politely, all night, and she dies. This same Levite cuts her in pieces and sends her to all of Israel. This is all here in Judges 19. So now you get a sense of this backstory that now we are going to go back to 1 Samuel chapter 1. Now, In the name Jehoram, 1 Samuel chapter 1, please, the slide. I want you to see that in his name, not Elkanah, but in this man Jehoram, his name is Rechem. Oh, this is verse 2. Can I get verse? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Rechem. Rechem is the word in Hebrew for womb. Womb will be mentioned several times later in this chapter. As I said, there's going to be a lot of repetition that you will hear. Okay, now in verse 2, please, 1 Samuel. And he, Elkanah, had 2 wives. And the name of one was Hannah. The name of the second was Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now, a man having 2 wives. Last week, we heard what? You have a redeemer. You have, if a man dies, and he does not have any children, well, what happens? Clearly, she has to be passed on to the next kinsman to be redeemed. So we do not know why this man has 2 wives. So before we jump to conclusions and guess that it's polygamy, we just don't know. Now, Hannah, her name means grace, or grace-filled, or graceful. That's what her name means. Peninnah means jewel or precious stone. If you go to Israel today, you'll hear that name a lot. It means pearl. So if you hear the name Marguerite in Greek, that means pearl. Margot in French, that also means pearl. It's the exact same name. Now, with Judah and Tamar, you have Boaz and Ruth, you have the Redeemer. So that's why we don't know about, we don't know why, but the reasons are there that this man had more than one wife. And in verse 3, it says, and this man went up, meaning Elkanah, went up out of the city yearly to worship and to sacrifice unto the Lord of hosts in Shiloh, and the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. This is going to be 2 bits of foreshadowing, okay? Lord of hosts, this name is going to be mentioned by Hannah, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but in Shiloh, that takes us back to Mount Ephraim, which was in verse 1, okay? Eli is there, but Hophni and Phinehas are the priests, okay? Have I lost anyone? Is everyone still with me? Okay. Verse 4, and it happened one day. You have, and whenever the time came, but different versions, different translations, the words in Hebrew are v'hi-ayom, and it happened one day. Now, when we're telling stories about certain people, especially our family members, we're going to use things that are going to link who we know, friends and family, to other people in our family so they know where we're going with the story. The Bible is the same way. So imagine when you hear these words, v'hi-ayom, there's only 2 other places in the entire Bible that this is mentioned that leads to a story. The first is Job. Now, Job was minding his own business, and God talks to the devil who presents himself saying, hey, have you considered my servant Job? And it all starts with, and it happened one day that the sons of God were presenting themselves to the Lord. Just starts that way. The second time that this is mentioned is in 2 Kings chapter 4. You have Elisha and you have Gehazi. And they're going to this little village, and there's this little elderly couple. They're very sweet, and they're, we got to help out this man of God. So let's build a little room in our house that he can stay when he's passing through. So Elisha asks Gehazi and says, hey, what should we do for this couple? And Gehazi's like, well, they don't have a kid. So he's like, okay, praise for the Lord. They get a kid. What happens to the kid? The kid dies. Unbelievable. But it all starts with, and it happened one day. Okay, so we all know that what's coming is going to be a dramatic story. So Elkanah offered, he gave to Peninnah his wife, and to all of her sons and daughters portions. Now Elkanah, El is God, Kana is purchased or acquired. If you read Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, it says Cain. Why is he called Cain? Because the word in Hebrew is acquired, kaniti. Eve says, I have acquired a man with God. That's why we have Cain. The name Cain comes from kenyon, which is acquired. So we don't know why, but God has purchased this man. For this purpose, well, we're all going to find out together. Verse 5, but unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion, for he loved Hannah. But the Lord had shut up her womb. Womb is mentioned here, but worthy portion, it's one portion for two people. That's what this means. But more importantly, it says he loved only Hannah. Okay? Now, if you think about this portion, this sacrifice, in Leviticus chapter 7, when you give food to your family members, the fat in Leviticus 7 always went to the Lord. When you sacrificed, a thank offering or a peace offering always went to the Lord. Now, the chest and the right shoulder goes to the priests. Okay? You all understand that? Okay, and then the rest of the body of the animal went to the sacrificer. So this is why it says it was either a peace offering or a thank offering. Verse 6, 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 6. And her rival, meaning Hannah's rival, grievously grieved her. Now we have a double verb. This is going to be important, and I'm going to point it out as we go along. For to make her fret, because the Lord had shut up her womb. Now remember, what we talked about, there's going to be a lot of repetition in this chapter. Rival. This word is used again later on in Samuel when David is talking to Saul in a speech that I could have done harm to you. And he uses this word in this speech, rival. Well, obviously we know from the example that Saul was setting, he clearly was a rival with David, but not the other way around. Same here. Peninnah is a rival to Hannah, but not the other way around. Now, if you think about this, and this is painful to talk about, it's not nice that a man loves one woman over another woman, especially if they're both his wives, but we all understand hurt people hurt. If I am hurt, I am more likely going to hurt someone else. So we all can feel for Peninnah that she has obviously a lot of emotional pain that she's going through. Verse 7. And as he did so, this is Elkanah, year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, she provoked her, this is Peninnah, and therefore Hannah wept and did not eat. Now, I want all of us to think about this for 1 second. Hannah is a godly woman. She is not striking back. She is not accusing Peninnah. But this is important for all of us. Either us men want a godly woman, and you women want to be a godly woman. So if you think back to the stories that one story last week was Ruth and Naomi as an example. Verse 8, then said Elkanah, her husband, to Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why is your heart grieved? And am I not better to you than 10 sons? Now, I'm not a parent, but all of you ladies who are mothers, think about your husband saying to you, am I not more important to you than your firstborn, secondborn, all your children combined? I won't answer that. I'll let you answer that for yourselves. Not a very wise thing to say, but these are all questions. He is speaking from his perspective. Like what we said earlier, he's trying to fix something. He's trying to affect change. He's just talking. He's not really sharing. Verse 9, Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh and after they had drunk. So imagine, even though she's not eating, when her husband tells her, why aren't you eating? She eats, even though clearly she is grieved and does not want to, but she does it anyway. Now Eli is the priest that sat upon the seat by the post in the temple of the Lord. This is in Shiloh. It says so in verse 9. Shiloh. So we have the location again. We're back in Ephraim. And in verse 10, and she, Hannah, was in bitterness of soul and prayed upon the Lord and wept and wept. It says wept sore, but it's a double verb. So if you recall, every time, the first time it's used in the Bible is in Genesis. When God is telling us, if you eat of this tree of knowledge, you will surely die. Well, there is no word for surely in Hebrew. Doesn't exist. You will die, yes, you will die. It is a double verb that God uses in Genesis. Mut vamut. You will die, yes, you will die. So in the Bible, when you have double verbs, God's trying to get our attention. That this is really important, and this is just real life. People are suffering, and we are now witnessing what's happening. So this is the title of my message, Prayed Upon the Eternal. Okay? Now in verse 11, this is going to be the focal point of this message. And Hannah vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look upon the affliction of thine handmaid, and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but will give unto thine handmaid a man-child, then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. This is a lot to unpack, so we're going to do our best here. Now, first of all, Ruth calls herself thine handmaid. Last week, we talked a lot about when Ruth called herself to Boaz, thine handmaid, thine handmaid, thine handmaid. She is showing subservience to Boaz, and clearly here, Hannah is doing the same thing with God. Okay, that's the first thing. Now, O Lord of hosts. This is a very, very popular phrase later in the Bible. Hannah is the first human being to use this in referencing our God. God himself referenced this when he was with Joshua. Remember Joshua and them as they enter the land, and he sees this guy with a sword, and Joshua goes up and says, hey, are you with us or are you against us? And he's like, no, I am the captain of the army of the Lord of hosts. That's all that God said to Joshua. God uses this phrase, talking about himself. Now you have Hannah using it, and afterwards you will have Malachi, Zechariah, Haggai, Amos, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Nahum, Hosea, Daniel 60 times, Jeremiah 80 times, and her own son Samuel is going to use this phrase, Lord of hosts. So think about this. Now, when Hannah says, all the days of his life, wait a minute. How long were Levites supposed to serve in the temple? Does anyone know? Yeah, 25 to 50. That's it. This is all of his life. She is promising and dedicating her kid, before she has one, to God forever and ever. This is huge. And on top of that, you have the Nazirite vow. Remember the Nazirite vow? We all remember that. Samson, John the Baptist. No wine, no grape juice, no raisins. You will not touch a dead body. It's so important. So important. All right here. So, that was verse. Well, she says also, remember me and do not forget me. Now, I want you to think about, this is foreshadowing for next week's Bible study. I want you to think about the vow that Esther will make, or is going to be referred to Esther. I want you to think about the word vow for between now and next week's Bible study. Okay? So that's my foreshadowing that I'm going to throw in there. Verse 12. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 12. And it came to pass that she continued praying in the face of the eternal God, that Eli marked her mouth. It says before, but the word is panim. The word is face in Hebrew. She is praying upon the face of God. She is petitioning our Creator. Okay? Now I want you to think about, where did I start out with this message? Does God want us to just try to effect change with Him when we're praying to Him? Do we just ask Him stuff? Or does God want us to share ourselves? Does God want us to pour out ourselves, our passions, our ideas, our loves, our hates, our joys, our concerns? You can answer for yourselves, but I think you're getting an idea about what the Bible is using as an example. So in verse 13, now Hannah, she spoke upon her heart. Only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought that she was intoxicated, drunk, inebriated. Okay, I don't know how Eli surmised that, but the heart, the core, corazón, your heart is the center of your body. It says that she spoke upon her heart. And we have biblical examples. So we have Strong's, Strong's number 5921. It's beautiful. Can we get the slide for Strong's? All is upon. So earlier in this book, it said that Eli sat upon the seat by the temple. This is the same word. Used as a prefix. You could read it here if you want to. It's a lot of information. But it is upon something. Not next to. It's upon something. So the first example we're going to use is Exodus chapter 28, verse 30. So if you have a Bible, we have a slide. Exodus chapter 28, verse 30. And thou shalt put in the breastplate of the judgment. No, I'm off by a check. No. Here it is. And thou shalt anoint Aaron and his sons and consecrate them, and they shall be ministers of the priests of the office. Oh, I'm still off. I was right the first time, wasn't I? 30. Thou shalt put in the breastplate the omen of thumb, and thou shalt be Aaron's upon Aaron's heart. Literally, this is upon his chest. This is upon his heart. Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, please, is the next verse. It's easier if I mark it out earlier. But Daniel purposed, it says, in his heart. That is not the correct translation. It is upon his heart, the al that you saw with the word, that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince, of the eunuchs, that he might not defile himself. And the best example that we can find is in Genesis chapter 8, verse 21. This is God himself speaking after the sacrifice that Noah made. And the Lord smelled a sweet Savior. And the Lord said upon his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing as I have done. Same word, upon, al, when you look it up in the Hebrew. Now, we saw the good examples. Let's look at 3 bad examples. Genesis chapter 27, verse 41. Talk about Esau. And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are coming soon, then I will slay my brother Jacob. In his heart. Okay? Let's go to Esther, chapter 6, verse 6. So Haman came in. This is right after the king can't sleep. And the king said unto him, what shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, to whom would the king delight to do honor more than myself? In his heart. And the final example, is in Psalm chapter 14, verse 1. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. So what I presented for you is the example of God saying, when you pray upon me, you are pressing down, you are trying to not only get what you want, what you're asking for, but you're sharing yourself. You are being you with God, which is all we can be, which is all we should be. God can see through our intentions. He can see through what it is that we really want, our ulterior motives. He can see through all that. He wants us to be genuine. He wants us to be what He created us and intends us to be for Him. Now, going back to 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 14. And Eli said unto her, meaning Hannah, how long wilt thou be drunken? Put away thy wine from thee. Now, this is God's representative accusing her, falsely accusing her. I won't speak for anyone in this room but myself. In my younger days, in my younger years, I would have been offended. Had someone accused me of something I did not do, I would be angry. I would not be spiritually mature and be like, hey, he's a representative of God. I think all God's representatives are like this. I think all people in authority. I could go on in an immature mind. Hannah was mature. Hannah understood. Verse 15. And Hannah answered and said, no, my Lord, I am a woman of sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Hannah cared about appearances. That's something we should remember. All of us. Remember Boaz with Ruth. When she came down to the threshing floor and laid at his feet in the dark. She's a betrothed woman to a kinsman who's closer than Boaz was. He kept her reputation intact. And that's what all of us should be mindful of. All of us should be mindful of. Now, in verse 16, 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 16, count not thine handmaid for a daughter of Belial, for out of the abundance of complaint and grief have I spoken hereto. Now, Belial, Bli is the word that's conjugations, two words put together. Bli is without, al is burden. To be without burden. To not care that you are speaking about, well, in this case, she's praying to God, but Eli doesn't know that. Think about in 2 Corinthians, I don't have a slide for this, 2 Corinthians 6, verse 16. If you're taking notes, write this down. Paul is making a reference that if you eat of the Passover table with the sons of Belial, it is a synonym for Satan the devil. So, obviously, this scripture in verse 16 of 1 Samuel, it's a pretty strong statement that Hannah is saying to Eli. But this is foreshadowing, but I don't want to get ahead of myself for the next chapter. Verse 17, excuse me. Then Eli answered and said, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant thee thy petition that thou hast asked him. Eli reflects that he is wrong, and he corrects himself, and he bids her farewell, but he does so in a very positive way. That's something that we need to take away from this remark that he makes. He believed in her. Verse 18, and she said, let thine handmaid find grace in thy sight. So the woman went away, and she ate, and her countenance was no more sad. That's interesting. She prays to God, and she leaves. What's changed? Has she gotten her man-child? No. She asked God for something. She petitioned God, and because of her faith, it says she's no more sad. And her name means grace, and she uses the word grace. 11 times her name, proper noun, Hannah, is used. This is the 12th time, and it's just the word grace. 12 times her name is used in this first chapter. I want you to consider that as well. Verse 19. And they rose up early in the morning, worshiped before the Lord, and returned and came to their house in Ramah, back at Mount Ephraim. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. This is beautiful. Think about this. Sarah, excuse me, the Lord remembers Sarah. The Lord remembered Rebekah. The Lord remembered Rachel. The Lord remembers Manoah's wife. This is all really, really important. It is here for us. Verse 20. Therefore it came to pass that when the time was come about after Hannah had conceived, that she bore a son and called his name Shmuel, Samuel, saying, because I have asked him of the Lord. Asked. That's a different word. That's shalua. That's not Shmuel. She is connotating the two together for us. I asked and God heard me, which is what Samuel's name means. You have two synonyms of two different names. Ishmael, God has heard, and Elishamba, Eli, my God, Shama has heard. God has heard me. Samuel, Shmuel, is a synonym of those other two names. Verse 21. And the man Elkanah and all of his house went up to offer unto the Lord the yearly sacrifice and his vow. He has a vow too. Remember I asked you, foreshadowing, think about next week. Vows are going to be important with Esther. But Hannah has vowed. Elkanah has vowed. Who else did vows in the Bible? That would be Samson, right? In the book of the Judges, the time of the Judges. Jephthah, he made a vow. Vows are important. Verse 22. But Hannah went not up, for she said unto her husband, I will not go up until the child be weaned, and then I will bring him. Then he may appear before the Lord and abide there forever. This is going back to what the Levites, 25 to 50, this is all of Samuel's life. He is dedicated to the God of this book. The God. Verse 23. And Elkanah, her husband, said unto her, do what seemeth good to you. Tarry until you have weaned him, until the Lord has established his word. The Lord has established his word, and the woman abode and gave her son suck until she weaned him. This do what seemeth good is a quote that later on Eli himself, in a very ominous way, will say this in chapter 3, verse 18. But we won't get that. What? Okay. Where are we now? Verse 24. And when she had weaned him, she took him up there, 3 bullocks, 1 ephah of flour, and a bottle of wine. Brought him unto the house of the Lord in Shiloh, Mount Ephraim. And the child was young. Burnt sacrifice for the vow, the burnt sacrifice, the sacrifice itself, and the peace offering, those are the 3 bulls. This is why it says 3 bullocks. So there's 3 of them, okay? Now the flour, this 1 ephah is going to go over all 3 of the bullocks, okay? And the wine is poured out as a drink offering. Hannah knows who gave her this blessing. That is why it's included for us to read. Verse 25, and they slew the bullocks and brought the child to Eli. Verse 26, and she said, O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I am the woman that stood by thee here, praying unto the Lord. Verse 27, for this child I prayed for, and the Lord hath given me my petition, which I asked of him. How many of us have already, but in the future when we pray for something, when we ask God for something, we can say these exact same words. God will reward us for our faith, whether we have it and he gives us what we ask for eventually, or we do not have it yet, and we have to build ourselves to understanding the author of this book. Verse 28, therefore also I have lent him to the Lord, and as long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. And he, Samuel, worshipped the Lord there. All of us belong to God. All of our grandparents, all of our future grandchildren, all of us are God's children. That's something all of us need to remember. Now, I want you to think about this. We're going to play some music, okay? These are hymns that we sing all the time, including today. Now, I want you to think about, while the music is being played, these hymns are going to be 8, 9, 46, 121, 136, 137, 144, 162. Within the words of these hymns are all inspired. Not every single word, but most of the words are inspired by Hannah in the prayer that I'm about to read for you. And Hannah prayed and said, my Lord, my heart rejoiceth in the Lord. Mine horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth is enlarged over mine enemies, because I rejoice in thy salvation. There is none holy as the Lord, for there is none beside thee, neither is there any rock like our God. Talk no more so exceedingly proud, let not arrogancy come out of your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty men are broken, and they that stumbled are girded with strength. That they were full have hired out themselves for bread, and they that were hungry have ceased. So that the barren hath borne 7, and she that hath many children is waxed feeble. The Lord killeth, and the Lord maketh alive. He bringeth down to the grave, and he bringeth up. The Lord maketh poor, and he maketh rich. He bringeth low, and he lifteth up. He raiseth up the poor out of the dust, lift up the beggars from the dunghill, set them among princes, and to make them inherit the throne of the glory. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he hath set the world upon them. He will keep the feet of his saints, and the wicked shall be silent in darkness, for by strength shall no man prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken into pieces. Out of heaven shall he thunder upon them. The Lord shall judge the ends of the earth, and he shall give strength unto his king, and exalt the horn of his anointing. All of those words are found in those psalms that we sing all the time. And I want you to think about that now. As we come to a conclusion, what did Elkanah think of Hannah? She was a crybaby. What did Peninnah think of her? What did Eli think of her? She's a drunk. Isn't that crazy? Hannah was the closest one in the relationship of this book to God out of all of them. Now Samuel, like his mother, is going to write, if you read, I recommend it, you read the first and second books of Samuel, you're going to see an intimate prophet who's going to use words that have not been used since Moses. Very close, very personal. It's going to change, perhaps, your perspective on how God views us communicating with him. Now, in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 12, the sons of Eli, it says, were like the sons of Belial. Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas. Reminds me a lot of Nadab and Abihu. Aaron's sons, too. Wicked, terrible examples. People's positions in the Bible, high priest sons, do not always reflect their relationship with God. That's something all of us must remember. A title or position does not explain how close or far they are from God. Now, to end it on a positive note, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7. If you have a Bible, I don't have a slide for this, sorry. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7. Casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. And I want you to think about the sermonette that we heard about having a godly attitude, like Hannah, is really, really important. So, as we end this, I want you to think about when we pray to God, archetypically, are we going to pray like men or are we going to pray like women? Because when we think about this book is the Bible. And what we're going to be concentrating on is it's not just a biography about God himself, that we're loyal to a book. We need a relationship with God. Therefore, our focus should be on the author of this book, not just on the words that we read and talk about every day. God is our Father. We must never, ever forget that.